All right, what's happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from Street Scores, and it is officially official. The Commanders have hired Eric Bieniemy as their new offensive coordinator / assistant head coach. We got to talk about why that's significant. We got to talk about, does this make the Commanders a top free agency destination? We got to talk about the whole new ownership and all of that type of stuff going on as well. But does this help make us one of the top free agency destinations? Does this make guys like Daron Payne more willing to buy back into the team and maybe take a cheaper deal than he would have before we hired Eric Bieniemy? With Eric Bieniemy's pedigree and showing what he's done in great moments in the Super Bowl. Also, does Eric Bieniemy have the capabilities to take this offense to another level? I mean, I just feel like Sam Howell alone has to be just anything better than what we got from Taylor Heinicke and Carson Wentz. And the same thing with Eric Bieniemy. If you're better than Scott Turner, we've already improved from last year, which I feel like neither of those things are hard to do. But does Eric Bieniemy have the capabilities and the genius to potentially turn Sam Howell into like a Mahomes-like player? Can he take this offense to a new level? We're going to look at statistics and everything. What Eric Bieniemy has done with the Chiefs for the years he's been there as the offensive coordinator, and what the Commanders have done offensively, statistics-wise, the past few years, and why Eric Bieniemy should be an automatic upgrade over anything we've had recently. I also want to dive into this whole Eric Bieniemy situation. With him being named assistant head coach, what does this mean for him? Why did he choose the Commanders? Why did the Commanders want him so badly? Especially Ron Rivera, who could potentially be hiring his replacement. We got to talk about why that's a big risk, but also potentially a big reward for Rivera long term making this hire. Also got to talk about the fact that Eric Bieniemy is more than likely going to be given control of the entire offense. We're not just talking about draft picks, we're not just talking about free agents, we're also talking about the coaching staff. I'm assuming that Eric Bieniemy is going to be able to decide who's the running backs coach, the wide receivers coach. Shouts out to Drew Terrell for getting that offensive coordinator job with another team. He just left. I'm not sure if a lot of people noticed that because of all of the Eric Bieniemy chaos, but our wide receivers coach just went and became an offensive coordinator somewhere. So I was looking like, did we just miss out on another Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan? Did we just let another one slip right under our noses? I don't know. Doesn't really matter because we have Eric Bieniemy, and I'm very excited about that. But again, Eric Bieniemy is more than likely going to have the control of the entire offense, including the staff that we hire to be our receivers coach, running backs coach, offensive line coach, tight ends coach, all of that type of stuff. And honestly, hey, bring everybody you had with the Chiefs with you if that's the case. I mean, I like a lot of the guys that we have, and I would be pretty sad to see our running backs coach and our running backs assistant coach is gone. But hey, at the very least, bring that tight ends coach, that offensive lines coach, and go ahead and bring that wide receivers coach while you're at it, because we need one right now. Bring the QBs coach with you too. I'm cool with that too. But man, we have so much to dive into in this video. Hope it doesn't run too long. We'll see. I already recorded a video earlier, but for some reason the audio messed up, so now I'm re-recording it. But I'm kind of glad that I am, because now I have so much more information and so many more opinions on it. So this video is even better than the last one. So turning a negative into a positive. But before we dive into all of that, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell next to the subscription button so you get a notification immediately. And every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one, make sure you pull up every Sunday, not this upcoming Sunday because I'm still busy, but the Sunday after that and every Sunday following that for the live call-in shows where I open up the phone lines and y'all call in and we talk about everything. Eric Bieniemy becoming the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks, draft, free agency, upcoming schedule predictions, anything you want to talk about. And then also make sure you stay tuned for all of the content, because I'm about to start getting into my film sessions for a lot of the potential draft prospects that we may look for in this upcoming 2023 NFL draft. So stay tuned for all of the content, man. So much stuff to talk about, so many things to do. So without further ado, let's get it. All right, so Ian Rapoport tweeted, sources, the Commanders and Chiefs offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy are finalizing the deal for him to be their new offensive coordinator. Ron Rivera's first choice all along should be official tomorrow. Scratch that. It was made official tonight. Eric Bieniemy is now not only the new offensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders, but also the next assistant head coach. That's huge. And he's signing a multi-year deal. I've heard that it's 2 years, but either way, the fact that it's not just one is very interesting, because I'm pretty sure Ron Rivera and company had to to approach Dan Snyder about that. Like, Dan Snyder had to be involved in that, and maybe even potential new owners had to be somewhat involved in that and stuff like that. So that's really interesting, the fact that he signed to a 2-year deal. Now, at the end of the day, they could just end up firing him if they really wanted to, but I'm pretty sure a lot of factors were taken into effect outside of just Ron Rivera and Martin Mayhew as the GM. The ownership mattered in this decision. So I'm pretty sure that's why this whole process took like more than a day of having dinner, meeting at the team facilities, touring the team facilities, and then having dinner again. I think a lot of logistics had to be talked out, not only with Eric Bieniemy and Ron Rivera, but also like Dan Snyder and guys like that. I heard that Jason Wright was even brought to the interview in hopes of being able to relate to Eric Bieniemy more so that he would be willing to take the job. I mean, the Commanders went full go on this. I heard it's because Jason Wright and Eric Bieniemy have a California connection, and their high schools are like only a few miles apart or something like that. So they pulled out all the stops. This feels very similar to the Josh Norman situation with the helicopter, Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon. They did everything to court this guy and increase their chances of him accepting the offensive coordinator job. They did everything that they could to flatter him. They even brought in Jason Wright, the team president, just because he's from the same city as Eric Bieniemy in California, I guess. But this is really interesting because it's reported by Tom Pelissero that Kansas City wanted him back, and that was a big shock to me. I didn't know Kansas City wanted him back. I thought after they signed him to a 1-year deal this past season, the 2022 season before this Super Bowl, that they just wanted to bring him in for one more season. Maybe Andy Reid was like, you know what, nobody's giving you the head coaching job you want, so we'll let you stay here for another year type of thing, and then you got to go after that. But apparently, I guess maybe he did enough of a good job. I mean, he excelled even Andy Reid's expectations, who he's been around for years, and maybe Kansas City thought about it like, maybe we shouldn't let him go. This thing is working out very well, and even though originally we were ready to move on from him, now we actually wanted him back. And the fact that he took this over going back to Kansas City says a lot as well. But of course, it's an upgraded title. I mean, he was the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs, but there's always been these debates about how much control he actually had over the offense and play calling, all of those things like that. There's no questioning that here. First of all, he's an assistant head coach, which he wasn't in Kansas City. And then also, he's going to have full control of the offense. Scheme, play design, play calling especially, and again, personnel, the coaching staff, everything, draft picks, free agents that we bring in, all of that is going to have to run through Eric Bieniemy, and which is one of the reasons that he really wanted to come to the Commanders. That's one of the biggest reasons. The reasons that it was down to the Ravens and the Commanders was because we both have defensive-minded head coaches. Eric Bieniemy wanted to go somewhere we had complete control over the offense, nobody micromanaging him, giving unnecessary and unwanted opinions and things like that, trying to take over. And I think Ron Rivera, with as badly as he wanted Eric Bieniemy, he's actually going to give him full control. Scott Turner was the play caller, but I'm not sure if he had full control. I think he influenced the decision for us drafting Antonio Gibson and things like that, but I don't think Scott Turner had anywhere near as much control as he's going to have with Eric Bieniemy. Most notably, the coaching staff, like I mentioned. I don't think Scott Turner really had much of a decision in the assistant coaches that went in. I'm pretty sure he played a part, but I don't think he was just a straight up say so. It starts with him and ends with him. Just like Jack Del Rio, he controls pretty much who they have on the defensive staff. I don't think Scott Turner had that. Eric Bieniemy clearly has that here. And again, Eric Bieniemy wanted to go to either the Ravens or the Commanders, defensive-minded head coaches. They do their thing. Eric Bieniemy comes in and does his whole thing by himself. And so that's why he chose us after, sadly, the Ravens took my boy Todd Monken from my Georgia Bulldogs. It's okay. I like Mike Bobo a lot. I'm one of those Georgia fans that's actually very excited about Mike Bobo. But of course, when you lose Todd Monken, it is going to be somewhat of a downgrade, maybe in some way, but it's going to probably be hard to notice because we're so talented. Either way, that's me just digressing. But either way, once the Ravens spot got taken by Todd Monken, it was pretty much obvious that Eric Bieniemy was going to come to the Commanders. We could tell for the past few weeks that it was very likely. And then the past couple of days, we pretty much knew it was a done deal. It was just looking like after he won the Super Bowl, what was left to really stay in Kansas City for, where you can go to the Commanders, again, after Todd Monken took the Ravens job, and go become your own person. We're your quickest route, your best potential route to being a head coach somewhere. And first of all, my point that I've already said, that Eric Bieniemy probably chose the Commanders because with Rivera's job on the line, with him potentially being on the hot seat with new owners, new potential owners were already talking to Sean Payton and telling him, hey, if we buy the team, will you come be a head coach for us? So they already sound like they don't really like Rivera like that anyway. Rivera already sounds like he's on the hot seat. And so Eric Bieniemy could come in and be our offensive coordinator for 1 year and then get promoted to head coach the next year. That's his quickest route. And then of course, if you're like an offensive coordinator somewhere and and you can become the head coach in the same place. That's very convenient. You don't have to uproot your entire family. You don't have to sell your old house and buy your new house and things like that. He could be going to the same facilities, living in the same place. Children don't have to change schools, wife, all of that type of stuff. All those little things matter outside of football that a lot of people don't think about. But then also, the Commanders are a great opportunity. Again, defensive-minded head coach, so he controls everything. He has the opportunity to run the entire show. So it just made a lot of sense mutually for both of us. Adam Schefter tweeted at 7:02 p.m. that the deal is complete and official. Washington has given Eric Bieniemy the title of assistant head coach and offensive coordinator. It is, in the words of one source, a promotion and title, contractual structure, multi-year, and an annual pay raise. So Eric Bieniemy is super happy, and of course we're happy as well. I've heard from reports from Jordan Schultz that EB thoroughly impressed during his 2-day interview stint, and Ron Rivera felt they were just in lockstep. He's now tasked with the development of QB Sam Howell, and I'm pretty sure that's a big reason why Rivera believed in this guy. He feels like the Eric Bieniemy could do a really good job of developing Sam Howell more than pretty much every other candidate that was available out there, especially at this point, because y'all know I was a big Shane Steichen fan. I was willing to take a chance on Darrell Bevel, and I also like Thomas Brown. Shouts out to Thomas Brown for going to become the offensive coordinator for the Panthers. I feel like the Panthers got a potential good one there. I could see the debate between Thomas Brown and Eric Bieniemy. I mean, once you're like a Sean McVay prodigy, I feel like that holds a lot of weight, and the way that he rose through the coaching rankings, going from tight ends coach to offensive coordinator so quickly, definitely says something. Same thing with Drew Terrell, our wide receivers coach. I mean, that one caught me off guard. But at the end of the day, Eric Bieniemy is the same boomer bust as Thomas Brown, but he also comes with a way higher floor because he's shown you what he can do in big moments, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, man, apparently Eric Bieniemy killed his interviews, which is just shocking because the problems have always been like, is he not doing well in interviews, which is why he hasn't gotten a head coaching job yet, and he still hasn't been able to get a head coaching job. I mean, there was some out there, but then the Colts filled theirs, everybody filled theirs, and so it was only offensive coordinator jobs available, and again, it was down to the Ravens and the Commanders. The Ravens filled theirs, and then we were just the ones left, and we were his best opportunity from there. Now, who knows if he was eyeing us from the very beginning, he wanted to come here, even if there were other opportunities out there, but either way, we got him, and I'm happy. But Al Galdi brings up a good point. The Chiefs from 2018 to 2022 is maybe the best 5-season run of offense in NFL history. Eric Bieniemy was their offensive coordinator the entire time. His game planning and play designing were key. How he does with the Commanders depends on many things, but this is an exciting and huge upside hire, and I completely agree. Now, granted, the Chiefs have Pat Mahomes, they have Andy Reid, and they have Travis Kelce, along with other fantastic pieces. But still, Eric Bieniemy was there. He knows what success looks like. He knows what it takes to be successful. And if we could just draft well and develop the guys we already have, we could potentially become that. It's not impossible. It's not very likely, but it's also not impossible. Also, shouts out to ESPN Stats and Info because they tweeted Eric Bieniemy became the Chiefs offensive coordinator in 2018. And in his 5 seasons, Kansas City ranked first in the NFL in points per game with 30.1. Over that same span, Washington had the 3rd worst points per game in the league with 18.8. That right there alone, please, Eric Bieniemy, because this defense is elite. Top 10, I feel like, at the very least, especially when everybody's healthy. And wait till after this draft, especially if we get like a Christian Gonzalez or a Devin Witherspoon or something like that. Wait till after this draft. And then the pieces, we're going to talk about the pieces soon on offense. And I just feel like all you have to do is just be even slightly better than Scott Turner, and we should make the playoffs, which is another thing too. I think it's really interesting that he left the AFC to come to the NFC. That may have been a determining factor for him, because now, first of all, the NFC is weaker than the AFC. Way less good quarterbacks, way less good teams, period. So it's an easier path to potentially go into the Super Bowl and playing against your former team, the Chiefs. Imagine the Commanders and the Chiefs in the Super Bowl in 2024, or maybe in the near future soon after that. That would be amazing. Red and yellow versus burgundy and gold. Eric Bieniemy versus his former teacher and Andy Reid. I think that would be fantastic. Eric Bieniemy's old friend versus his new friend, Pat Mahomes versus Sam Howell. I just think that's that type of Disney movie stuff that maybe Eric Bieniemy took into account. And again, I think most importantly, the NFC is weak compared to the AFC more than potentially facing his former team in the Super Bowl. And one thing that I really want to point out with Eric Bieniemy is the red zone creativity. I mean, you can say whatever you want about him play calling wise and things like that, but the red zone stuff was him. Andy Reid always credited Eric Bieniemy with all of the crazy, chaotic goal line things that they were doing. So all of that red zone stuff against the Eagles where guys were wide open for touchdowns, the spinning in circles before the play starts, a lot of that was Eric Bieniemy. Eric Bieniemy also credited somebody else, I forgot his name, after the Super Bowl interview with some of the stuff, but Eric Bieniemy gets a lot of that credit from Andy Reid. And so I'm just really hoping that he really just like literally photocopies the playbook that him and Andy Reid came up with and brings that over here, please. Sam Howell may not be Pat Mahomes, but he can do a lot of Pat Mahomes-like things. He doesn't have the same arm, but he has a rocket arm. He has some of the same mobility. Then, of course, there's a lot of quarterback mental stuff that Sam Howell doesn't have that Pat Mahomes has, but at least all of that stuff is teachable. All of the physical stuff, Sam Howell is pretty much almost right there, except for like the being able to sidearm with no leg strength and it's just a straight rocket through the middle. Not everybody can do that. Sam Howell has a very strong arm, but I don't think it's necessarily Mahomes, to be completely honest. But again, Eric Bieniemy can take a lot of that same stuff that he was doing with the Chiefs and bring that over here, especially with the weapons that we have, which I'm going to talk about very soon with Terry McLaurin and all of those guys. But hey, man, just like I said with Mike Bobo coming in, make sure you copy and paste that entire Todd Monken playbook and do not deviate much from it. I say, Eric Bieniemy, bring that same exact playbook you had for the Chiefs and bring it over to the Commanders. Yes, please. Also, shouts out to the Commanders, because I'm really happy that they're the ones that finally gave him a chance, because a lot of people out there, especially Louis Riddick, I mean, he's been going to bat for him forever, feels like Eric Bieniemy should be a head coach somewhere. Ryan Clark went on a whole rant about it, and I definitely agree, but I'm just happy that we looked up and were able to get him as an offensive coordinator and maybe potentially a head coach if Ron Rivera ends up getting fired, which is another thing too. Shouts out to the Commanders for giving Eric Bieniemy this opportunity to prove himself when a lot of other teams wouldn't. And also shouts out to Rivera for putting his ego to the side. This is boom or bust for him as well. I mean, of course, us fans are really excited about the potential, but Eric Bieniemy could go out there and be the best offensive coordinator of all time for some crazy reason, and that could either save Ron Rivera's job or get him fired, because maybe the new ownership is like, well, why do we need you? We could just promote Eric Bieniemy to be the head coach or something like that. So this could be boom or bust, whether Eric Bieniemy balls out or fails. Either way, I see out of 4 scenarios, 3 of them include Ron Rivera getting fired. If Eric Bieniemy's terrible, I can see Ron Rivera getting fired for deciding to bring him in by the new ownership, because they probably didn't play much of a part in Eric Bieniemy getting signed. That was more so like a Dan Snyder, Jason Wright, Martin Mayhew, Ron Rivera thing. And then also, even if Eric Bieniemy is great, the new owner may just look at it like, you know, Rivera, why do we need you? But there is a way where maybe the new owner looks at it as, well, Ron Rivera, you're the one that brought this guy here. I can trust you to continue making important decisions for this team and allow you to continue being the head coach. And maybe Eric Bieniemy eventually leaves to become a head coach elsewhere. Who knows? But shouts out to Ron Rivera for putting his ego to the side, because he could have potentially been hiring his replacement, which is crazy. But of course, I mean, Eric Bieniemy's great and all, and I think he's going to be great for us. I feel like at the very least, he's an upgrade over what we've had. And I feel like, again, Sam Howell compared to Taylor Heineke and Carson Wentz, with them being in the 30s in DVOA and certain advanced metrics for the QB situation, QBR and stuff like that, like literally 30s, like worse than other teams' backups. I feel like Sam Howell by default can't be that bad, which is already an improvement. And I also feel like the same thing with Eric Bieniemy can't be worse than Scott Turner. Even though I feel like Scott Turner was getting a lot more blame than he deserved, I still feel like Eric Bieniemy is a natural upgrade over him immediately floor-wise, and then the ceiling is super high. But at the same time, even if Eric Bieniemy comes in here and is just this genius that we hope he is, health matters a lot for this team. Fixing the O-line matters a lot for this team. We still got to figure out tight ends, and then most importantly, QB development. But at the same time, speaking of fixing the O-line, tight ends, all of that type of stuff, does Eric Bieniemy come in and make us a top free agency destination? I know with the new ownership, everything can get a little weird, especially if we don't transition from Dan Snyder to a new owner before the free agency period starts, which is late March. If we're not able to do that, things can get really ugly for us. But if we're able to move on and get a new owner and Eric Bieniemy is our offensive coordinator, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people want to pull up and play for the Commanders, maybe even for cheaper than they would for another team, because they can see the potential of this sleeping giant. I've been saying that the Commanders have been underperforming due to coaching for a while now. The talent on this team is good enough for us to really do some serious damage, especially in the weak NFC. It's just been bad quarterback play, bad coaching, and we need to fix the O-line as well. Again, Sam Howell can't be any worse than Taylor Heineke and Carson Wentz. If we would have started Sam Howell since Carson Wentz got hurt against the Bears, I'm pretty sure we would have at the very least made the playoffs. I feel like we should have at least beat the Giants once with Sam Howell, at least once, maybe even both times. And so I feel like that's already an upgrade. And then I also feel like with all of the players we have on offense, all of the great athletes and elite players like Terry McLaurin and stuff like that, and then this defense can potentially be elite as well battle again. They were elite last year, especially with Cameron Curl on the field. But again, that's why health matters. But a lot of people can be looking from the outside looking in. Outside free agents from other teams could be looking like, hey man, Eric Bieniemy has shown he can do it. And this Commanders team has a lot of talent. They just been underperforming to that talent. I don't think our talent is a 7-win team. I think coaching had a lot to do with that. And I think Eric Bieniemy provides a good enough boost along with potentially some health, some smart decisions in the offseason as far as free agency and the draft, to where we should be potentially like a 10-win team this upcoming season with a straight face. And I feel like a lot of other people can see that and buy into it. Maybe some potential offense alignment in free agency before we hired Eric Bieniemy may have looked at the Commanders like, but now that we have Eric Bieniemy, you look at all of these weapons, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson, and they're like, okay, all I got to do is go out there and block my tail off, and I could potentially be on my way to a good playoff run, maybe even Super Bowl, especially if Sam Howell develops the right way. I mean, all you got to do is maybe one of these potential offense alignment free agents just replay that Sam Howell game against the Cowboys over and over again. Maybe they get excited enough to pull up. Now, speaking of the weapons that we have, like I already listed, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, that receiving core alone is already better than anything Eric Bieniemy's had with the Chiefs. Now, granted, we don't have a tight end even anywhere near the stratosphere of a Travis Kelce, but receivers only wise, we got them beat, I feel like, easily. I feel like the gap isn't as big as our tight ends to their tight ends, but I feel like our receivers to their receivers is a pretty big gap. And then I feel like our running backs to their running backs is maybe not as big of a gap, but still a pretty considerable gap. So even though we don't have Travis Kelce and Pat Mahomes, we have a Sam Howell that can run a very similar offense very well. And then we have all of these other weapons around him that he can throw to, that he can utilize. I mean, I feel like Curtis Samuel and Antonio Gibson were drastically underutilized this past season. All Eric Bieniemy has to do is use those guys just like he used Isaiah Pacheco and those other running backs, those pass catchers basically out of the backfield. And our guys are more talented in my opinion. And I feel like he can have a field day with these guys. And then don't even get me started on Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. He hasn't had a receiving core like that in his coaching career. I think Eric Bieniemy could do great things with this team. And of course, upcoming draft wise, the guy that people feel like is the closest thing we've seen to Pat Mahomes since Pat Mahomes went to the Chiefs is Caleb Williams. And so maybe, I don't think we'll be anywhere near bad enough to just be in picking range of Caleb Williams at all. But if they really, really want Caleb Williams, because for some reason Sam Howell just isn't showing any development, Eric Bieniemy doesn't like him, us as fans don't like him. He just, for some reason, just failed this season, which I really don't see happening. But if he for some reason did, the Commanders could do everything in their power to trade up and get Caleb Williams. I could definitely see a new owner wanting to do everything he can to get a star quarterback, maybe potentially the next Pat Mahomes. And with Eric Bieniemy as your offensive coordinator, literally all he has to do is what he already did with Pat Mahomes, and this sky's the limit. Also, before we go, there was a Commanders ownership update that, again, with all of the news, Thomas Brown becoming the offensive coordinator for the Panthers, our wide receivers coach Drew Terrell becoming an offensive coordinator elsewhere. Just a whole bunch of other stuff was going on, but everybody was so focused on Eric Bieniemy, a lot of people didn't notice. But there was another bidding tour for a potential new owner at the Commanders facility today. And I'm also told that there has been at least 4 bids submitted to purchase the franchise. So at first there were a lot of bids, but then a lot of guys pulled out. And then we were hearing recently that it may only be between 2 people or 2 groups of people. Now it sounds like there's 4 serious contenders. You already had, I believe his name is Josh Harris, the owner of the 76ers and the Devils. He toured all of the facilities and went everywhere to look at what he may potentially be investing in. And now apparently there's another bidder that's done the same exact thing recently. I believe it was today / yesterday if you're watching this, as in Friday. So that's really interesting. Also, of course, a lot of people I'm seeing on Twitter are hoping that with us now having Eric Bieniemy, Eric B, that we draft Maryland Terps receiver Rakim Jarrett. So a lot of people are hoping that we have Eric B and Rakim, of course. I've been seeing that everywhere, even though I think it's pronounced Rakim, but I might be wrong. Also, shouts out to P. Haley for this tweet, because I feel like this is a great summary, and he provides a great point at the end of it. Eric Bieniemy, of course, is just the beginning for the Commanders offense. He can't save it alone. Offensive line has to be rebuilt, and someone, Howell or another guy, has to play quality quarterback. Still a sweet hire though, but he'll be motivated too. And that's my last point before we get up out of here. I mean, if anybody is motivated to succeed and to prove everybody wrong out of all of those interviews he went through, didn't he have like 16, 18 head coaching interviews, stuff like that, and got none of them? Didn't even make it to the second interview for a lot of them. So if anybody's motivated to prove that it's not just Andy Reid, it was me too. It's not just Pat Mahomes and Travis Kelce, it's me too. Because Andy Reid, Pat Mahomes, and Travis Kelce are obviously going to get more of the credit, more credit than Eric Bieniemy. So Eric Bieniemy, if anybody, is extremely motivated to succeed for the Commanders, and I'm very excited. I mean, Pat Shurmur probably could have done a decent job. Ken Zampese may have done a decent job, but I don't believe any of those guys are as creative as Eric Bieniemy. And most importantly, I don't think any of those guys have more to prove to the rest of the world than Eric Bieniemy as well, who really wants a head coaching job, especially at this point in all of their careers. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please leave a like on this video if you liked it, if you learned anything. As always, man, I appreciate all of the support, man. Shouts out to all of my sponsors, especially my Pro Bowl sponsors, whose name you see scrolling on the screen right now. Let me know in the comment section how you feel about this hiring, especially the people that didn't want to hire Eric Bieniemy. Now that it's official, have you warmed up to it, or are you still very much so against it? And who did you prefer instead of him if you didn't want him? And of course, man, I'll catch y'all later. I'm out.